Omakase, the life and words of author M. Kieran. Hi there. If this is our first time meeting each other, let me give you a brief introduction. My name is Max. I write books for a living. I write every day. My favorite flavor of ice cream. If green tea ice cream is not readily available, I will gladly take cookies and cream. My pronouns are they, them, and I disagree with the general consensus about how Monopoly is the board game that ends friendships. I strongly believe that Munchkin is the most powerful board game able to destroy friendships. I once played an 8-hour game of Munchkin, and I can tell you with confidence that I am no longer friends with anyone who was involved in that game. And welcome to the 7th episode of Omakase, my writing advice and inspiration podcast. This show is split into 3 sections. The first third of the show is all about my week, what I've been doing, what I've been working on, sharing a little bit of insight into my creative process and the media that I've been consuming. The second third of the show is all about viewer questions. I take the questions that I get on YouTube and on Twitter and from my email, and I feature 2 of them on this podcast. Today, as always, we have a technical question and a kind of inspirational question, though this week they're both kind of leaning more towards the technical side. We have a conversation on dialogue and a conversation about plot, bunnies, and what to do with them. Last, and by no means least, is the third of the show, where I would usually give you a weird prompt for you to think about and brainstorm about, but instead today I have a weird exercise, something to consider when coming up with the ideas for a story or when doing world building. We will talk about the palette on the last third of the show. But before we get there, 2 items of housekeeping. First off, the song that you hear at the beginning and at the end of the show is titled Dream of Green by the OC Jazz Collective and OCRemix.org. You can find out the link to this song and a website full with thousands upon thousands of free-to-download video game remixes in the description of this podcast or video. And of course, as always, if you really enjoy this show, please consider leaving a rating or a review on the podcast app that you're using to listen to this, or if you're watching on YouTube, consider leaving a like and a comment. It actually means a lot, especially for a new podcast. But with all that stuff out of the way, let's dive into the first segment of the podcast, my week. What have I been doing? What have I been consuming? What have I been doing? And this week has been kind of busy for me for several reasons. Of course, I've been writing every day. It's what I do. As of the recording of this video, I have broken the 90-day mark. I think as of today, I've been writing for 92 days consecutively. Some days are shorter than others, it's true. But at the end of it all, I haven't stopped writing, and it feels great. It's been a wonderful journey, and I can't wait. Day 100 is so close, and that's so exciting. But being entirely honest with you, this week has been a bit of a busy one. For one very particular reason, and I'm terrible about talking about myself, which is funny because I'm talking with you for an hour a week, and I used to make, videos all the time. And before that, I made posts all the time. And it's this thing where I am great at talking about writing, but I'm always hesitant about talking about myself. Not because, there's someone else lying behind the curtain. I'm a very straightforward person. Would an open book be too on the nose, considering, that I'm a writer? I've been busy this last week because I got married. I know. I should have, said something. We haven't had the big party yet. We just kind of did all the legal stuff. But yeah, no. Me and my longtime partner, Kitty, got married last week. It's been crazy. Mostly because I guess it's been the culmination of all these years knowing her and being with her and just She makes me so endlessly happy, and not to get overly cutesy right now, but how can I say this? I never thought I would find someone who feels so perfect for me. She's also a writer. We make the same kind of dumb jokes. We like similar things, though we disagree on certain things. We have similar passions, and we both love having projects and being creative with said projects. We run another channel together. If you know me on YouTube, we do a anime review, reaction, and let's play channel on YouTube called Dango Duo, and we've been doing that for like almost 2 years now. And we love having that separate project, which enables us to just be funny with one another. And ultimately, I feel the goal of the channel is just to say something so awful and terrible that it makes the other one laugh. And I think I mentioned it in one of the earlier podcasts, but life has been better for me. And part of that is because of Kitty. She takes very good care of me. And it's great to have someone who does not only support me in what I do, but also inspires me to keep telling stories and being better. Look, I'm doing it. I'm being cutesy. Oh no, I'm getting all emotional. She makes me endlessly happy. And I'm terrible at talking about it, mostly because I don't want to say that I don't want to talk about it. I just get lost in the moment, you know? Like, the day came, and, you know, we went out, and we met with our families, and we did the thing, and, like, next thing I knew was the next day. And I'm like, oh, I only tweeted, like, a very... I made a very cryptic tweet with, like, a wedding ring. A couple people were like, ooh, but, you know. So I've been busy. I got married, you know. That takes time, you know. As much as I would love to stay productive, that's silly. Now, I took it a little bit easier this week because, you know, we had things going on, people to see, people to talk to. Yeah, and it's been strange. Mostly because we're both really open about our feelings, and it's been strange to see the culmination of all these years of knowing each other and being together. And sometimes I find myself just coming back to music, lyrics that jump at me. And this is the nerdiest thing ever. I know. But I am reminded of a game I played a long time ago called Fallout New Vegas. A game in the post-apocalypse of the 1960s, with music of the same era that plays in the radio in the post-apocalyptic Mojave wasteland. And I remember, is it Frank Sinatra? I forget. The song Ain't That a Kick in the Head. How lucky can one man be? I kissed her, and she kissed me. Like a fellow once said, ain't that a kick in the head? My head keeps spinning. If this is just the beginning, my life is going to be beautiful. Yeah. Oh, I did it. I got all cutesy. Oh, alright, I'm getting all emotional. Anyhow, let's talk about some creative stuff. Music is very important to me, and it's just like lyrics coming to me. I want to talk a little bit about consistency in writing, because I know that it's been a subject that I've been bringing up recently. I've been editing, I've been writing, and right now, and if you're out of the circle, it's okay. If you're out of the loop when it comes to new anime releases, it's completely understandable. Right now, we're going through what is, because there's 4 anime seasons, you know, for spring, summer, fall, and winter. And right now we're going through what is summer anime. So there's new titles going out, new episodes going up every week on sites like Crunchyroll and Amazon and other websites. And Kitty and I, on our other channel, have been keeping up week to week. And it's very easy to just be all like, this anime is not very good, and that one over there is also not very good. Kitty and I have been going back and forth with a particular show which we have been watching week to week, and if you happen to follow the channel, you know which one it is. And the conversation emerged because we both found ourselves disagreeing on a particular point. And I feel like that's an element of how we're both different writers. I'm not going to go into great detail about the show because I don't think it's particularly important. What matters to me is the conversation about consistency regarding the context of a story. The anime that we're both disagreeing on is an anime in which it's a dark story where bad things are happening. Not bad things such as in, bad storytelling, but rather misfortune is falling upon our main character. And we're disagreeing about, well, we both agree that average people would hate this kind of story, they wouldn't like it. But we're both holding on for different reasons. One, because we both want to find out if the story is going to eventually go into the trash, And I hate to, make the obvious statement, but anime tends to be very inconsistent and tends to kind of not be very good storytelling. Unfortunate misfortunes and awful things are happening in the story. And because they're being set up with consistent writing, with foreshadowing, on principle, I'm still in. Kitty is finding herself signing off because of the content that's happening, the horrible things that are happening, and the misfortunes that are befalling our protagonist and our heroine. And I'm sitting there going, but it's good writing though. Things are being established. There's consistency. There is a pattern with the psychology, and stories like to claim that they are psychological horror, but this is the first psychological horror story that I've actually seen bringing up psychological elements in people like PTSD and the effects of abuse. And I'm just sitting there going, is this story good? Almost struck in disbelief. And I guess from my point of view, I sit there and I'm like, if you have a really consistent story where you establish things and you, I guess, don't trip, I feel like I will follow you until the end of the world, until, you trip or make a mistake. And I feel like that's kind of like the defining factor between me and Kitty when it comes to consuming media. And I feel like that's a very me thing, because I watch, I read, I consume anything. And even if it, regardless of the content, because I want to see how the storytelling is effective at it. And I feel like to me that's just at least from my point of view, the power of telling it consistent, internally consistent, and, doing your homework, putting in the work, doing the foreshadowing, making sure that things make sense for what the characters are saying. That anime can still, excuse the expression, go to hell. It's likely that it will trip eventually, but up until now, I still want to know where it goes. So consider that a slight reminder on the power of telling an effective story, of, being consistent, making sure to foreshadow things and that things make sense and that nothing is happening for free. It's been a strong belief of mine that nothing should be free for our main character, whether it is good fortune that comes their way when things work out for them or misfortune. The good fortune should definitely not be free. They should not just get good strokes of luck. They should always have to fight for every inch they get. And I'm a little bit more lenient with misfortune because, misfortune is the fuel for storytelling and drama. But when you justify the misfortune, when you foreshadow it, to me, that's the best of both worlds. But anyhow, I've gone on for way too long about my update. The only other little thing I want to just slide in here is that I spent a little bit of this week working on my writing zine. In case that you don't know, I actually have a Patreon-only writing zine that I make a digital version of, and I send physical copies of every single month to one of my Patreon tiers. Which reminds me, before we advance to the second segment of the show, I want to go over the people who make this podcast possible, and they are my patrons. I do not have any other sponsors. I don't do sponsorships, at least not at this particular moment. All of the funding for this podcast comes from my patrons. Patreon.com/mkaren is the number one place to support me and what I do. If you pledge just $1 a month, you get to listen to this podcast a week in advance, and my monthly workshop/video/podcast 30 days before anyone else gets to see it, and that is kind of cool in my opinion. There's also other perks, signed copies of my books, DRM free copies of my books, and of course, shoutouts and my writing scene. I would like to give a super duper big shout out to my super duper big patron, Atalak. Atalak has a DeviantArt page. You can find out more about their writing and their art over at deviantart.com/Atalak. That is deviantart.com/AHTILAK. And of course, I would like to give a big shout out to the rest of my big sponsors: A. Howard, Amelia, Angela, Brenda, Caitlin Bumbalo, Irina Phoenix, John Netz, Joe, Luki, Mark Maruska, Nicola, Pat Eichson, Polly Craftual, Rain Misoa, Soul Muse, and Synexia. And now, let us move over to the second part of the show, the writing questions. Today, we're going to be talking about dialogue and blood bunnies. I recently put up a video, or rather it went public. My patrons got to listen to that podcast a month in advance. And it was about the 3 bad writers, the 3 worst writers that I met when I was in college. And if you're listening to this on iTunes or on Spotify, that episode should actually be in the feed. It's a bonus episode, so you can download it if you want and listen to it. I go through, not horror stories, but, bizarre things that happened in college. You meet characters, You just meet characters in classes like that. The first question for today comes through one of those videos. I received a question on Tumblr regarding my points on purple prose. Or as one of the commenters was saying, purplescent prose. That does make it sound better. But anyhow, I talked about how one of the people that I met used purple prose to a ridiculous extreme, to the point of just bloating their writing with big words for the sake of having big words and to appear intelligent. Of course, that's silly, and we're going to talk about that. But one of the questions that I got on Tumblr was about, what if you have a character who speaks like that? Is it okay to have purple prose in your story, or purple-like prose, if you have a character who is speaking in that way? And of course, because there is synchronization, I also got a comment on YouTube kind of touching on that, and like the passive voice. And let's talk about dialogue, because I think that when it comes to the 3 main elements of storytelling, narration, description, and dialogue is the one that I think is the most difficult, at least for me. I have certainly realized that now that I'm writing every day, the sessions in which I'm writing dialogue definitely go a lot slower than the sessions where I'm just writing description and narration. Again, the 3 parts of writing: narration to guide the reader through actions, description to help them paint the images that we see on their own minds and the field of their imagination, and dialogue, the things characters say to communicate one another in the fiction. These 3 are the building blocks of storytelling. You need them, and it is through your experience using them that your ability to tell an effective story will improve. But dialogue is special. Dialogue is special because you are emulating the way that people talk. And people don't follow the rules of grammar. People sometimes say things that don't quite make sense, or that they, don't quite follow the rules of the things that you would say in narration or description. Dialogue is weird, and dialogue can be a bit of a pitfall if you are not out there listening to the way people speak. And this is funny because bad dialogue or ineffective dialogue is the easiest thing to spot, especially in someone else's writing. I am sure that all of you can at least point to one example of a movie, of a book, of a game, or of a particular instance in which a character said something that doesn't make sense. Because people don't talk like that. Pretty much any time that children appear in fiction, I feel like most of the time, they don't sound like what children actually sound like. They sound like adults putting words in their mouth. Which brings us to the question. How do we make dialogue better? What can we do to make dialogue better and more effective? I feel like the first thing that we need to establish is that the dialogue will break all of the rules. And this immediately harkens to the beginning of this question, the origin of this question. Is it okay to have a character speak in purpulescent prose, in big words for the sake of having big words? Absolutely. If this is the way that this character talks. The example of, a person speaking in big words for the sake of having big words to appear intelligent is completely on point. That is absolutely how a person like that guy I knew in college would absolutely talk. And in a situation like that, especially where the narration and the description kind of help guide the reader to understand where the person is talking in this particular way, then boom, you're golden. The one example that I saw in the comments that I didn't particularly agree with was the passive voice or passive writing, mostly because people don't talk like that. People don't actually use the passive voice because it sounds very mechanical, very inhuman. But that brings me to the core of this conversation. How do we make dialogue more authentic? Note that I'm saying authentic, not realistic. Mostly because realism is a weird thing to wish to achieve, mostly because the nature of reality changes with the times, and it depends on your location and where you are, and the culture and the subculture. Authenticity, I think, is a much more manageable goal. You want the characters who you're putting forth to sound like what the characters would sound like. And to me, this comes twofold. And here's a fun exercise that may get you in trouble, but my writing professor in college always wanted us to do at least once per semester. Go to a coffee shop, go to a restaurant, go somewhere where people are out and about, and listen to the way they talk. I'm not saying be a huge creep about it. I'm saying just sit and listen. You will notice something inherently different about real dialogue, real people talking. And another great example of this is to, if you're at a family gathering or something, just listen to the exchanges between your family. You will notice how often people just don't mention nouns or the focus of a sentence, and you will also notice just how quickly the conversation moves from point to point. The one thing I want you to realize is that communication, dialogue, is about the movement of information. I want you to know this, and you want me to know that. And that is why we as humans love shortening language. We love saying the least amount of stuff possible to get the biggest amount of information across possible. That's why, unless a character is literally sharing their life story, no one is gonna go on for more than 4 sentences at a time. That just isn't how conversations with real people go. There is back and forth. I could do an entire video just about the meaning and underlying meanings of your mom asking you how was school and you replying good, in spite of good not actually meaning good. And we can go there for days. But what I want you to get across right now is that dialogue is weird. Dialogue does not follow the rules. And a good way to get a grasp on dialogue is to hear it from real people, listening to them. And the most important thing, if you get one thing from this podcast right now, do your darnest. Do the best that you can to never use dialogue for exposition. Unless you can find a natural way to relay this information through dialogue, I would like to inspire you to leave that for narration. Mostly because normal people don't give you 20 blocks of exposition. Normal people don't talk like that. I mean, we can pretty much, and I didn't plan this, I just realized this looking over my notes, we can just cut back to the beginning of this video and me being very brief about, the fact that I got married. I gave you no description there. I didn't give you, my life story about how Kitty and I met in a writing class. I didn't give you, piles upon piles of that, because at the end of it all, I wanted to relay the information that I had gotten married, and that was the reason why I didn't have a lot of more creative things to talk about for my update. Dialogue is about the transfer of information, and it is how we humans communicate with one another. And you just know, you can just tell from, from California speech, how fast we just want to get that information across. Shortening words, using slang, it is part of how we humans communicate. That's why exposition and dialogue just always feels kind of weird, because people don't talk like that. People don't talk like that. And more importantly, I think that the best place, the most effective place to give a reader, the history of, that ancient elven city is to do it in narration, where you can actually be colorful, where you can actually go into the details and the nitty-gritty and the history of the 3 elven houses and whatnot. And you can do that. In dialogue, it's just kind of silly, because, again, people don't talk like that. I know that I've gone kind of long on this point, so let me just give you a quick summary. When it comes to dialogue, the rules are secondary. Because people talk the way people talk, and your goal in dialogue should not be to provide the reader with information, but rather to show how your characters communicate with one another. The easiest way, I think the best way, to show who your characters are as people is through the way by which they communicate with others. What they say, how they express, how they justify their choices and their actions. That right there. In that way, dialogue is almost as important as the choices our characters make, because it's a reflection of what they think. Especially if the story is not inside of their head. If we don't have insight into what they think, what they say is all that we have to go by. Okay? Okay. And as for the second question, let's talk about plot bunnies. A plot bunny is an expression regarding an idea for a story or a project. Of course, the issue with bunnies and plot bunnies is that they have the quality of multiplying when you're not looking at them. The plot bunny, which I believe originates from a John Steinbeck quote, I think. And I'm paraphrasing, you first have one plot bunny and then you have 12 plot bunnies. And I recently had a talk with a friend about their particular plot bunny problems. You always have too many to work on, and it's not, how do I say this? It's a reality for a creative person to have more ideas than the time to handle. I feel like this is something all of us have to come to terms with at one particular time or another. You will not have time to tell all the story ideas that you find. Wait, no, that bears repeating. You will not have the time to write all of the story ideas that you find, because story ideas are everywhere. The more time that you spend writing and creating and being creative, you realize just how ideas are everywhere. Listen, for the past, 6 episodes before this one, I've been giving you a story idea or multiple story ideas every week. And they're ideas that I stumble upon while making breakfast, while going out on my morning walk, while, looking at my cat. Ideas are everywhere. And the more time you spend writing and being creative, the easier it is to just flip over a rock and find 10 story ideas in there. So I think I want to just start off by dispelling the idea that, just because you have a story idea, it means that you have to pursue it. I think, and with the more time that you spend working on this, you will have a backlog. You will have a list. I have a list. I have a file on Evernote that is several hundreds of words long with just snippets, sometimes just sentences of an idea for a story. I think a thing that might happen in a story, ideas, and that file just keeps accumulating words. Sometimes I go in there and I do inventory of the ideas. I grab them. Sometimes it doesn't actually end up being a story. Sometimes they're just nice distractions. The issue at hand is this. What do you do if you have plot bunnies? Multiples. Because if you have a plot bunny, well, guess what? That's the story that you're working on. And you push through and you work on that plot bunny until it is completed. But when you have plot bunnies, when you have multiples of them, that's when you have a problem. My personal rule has always been to always finish what I start and to never juggle multiple projects at the same time. And I know you think right now, I am the one, Max. I am the one person who can juggle 2-3 stories at the same time. And maybe you are. Maybe you are the chosen one. All I can tell you is my own personal experience. And I have been there. And I have wasted a lot of time trying to juggle multiple things at once, when in reality, I should have just focused on one. I have said this before, but I think you're going to learn a lot more from finishing one thing. Going all the way through the process with one thing will get you further, will help you improve more than starting 1,000 projects. Trust me, I have. I have started so many projects, so many story ideas. Some of them were attempts at a long-time project. Some of them were shiny new story ideas that enticed me and pulled me away from my main project. I've been there. I have made the mistake. I am not perfect. But I think it's because I've tripped and I've fallen and I've gotten up that I can tell you with confidence. Focus on one project. Do not fall for the shiny story idea. Do not fall for it. And I know, especially if you've been working on the same book for like 6 months, for a year, for years, you think to yourself, I just wanna, just for a week. I just wanna see what happens. I feel, honestly, that you should just focus on the one task, on the one project at a time. I have never been successful juggling multiple projects. I have friends who claim they are good at it, but I don't know. Max says, looking at picture of their friend. I'm like, I don't know. I feel, even if you're good at juggling 2 projects, wouldn't you get more stuff done by just focusing on one? Wouldn't you get that project released sooner if you just focused on one? I don't know. I used to have a long exercise for figuring out which the best plot bunny to work on is. And with time and experience and tripping, falling, and getting up, I have learned and devised a new one-sentence, one-step system for you to realize which plot bunny is the one you should focus on. Are you ready to change your life? Are you ready to let go of plot bunnies and find the correct one, the shiny plot bunny that will lead you to victory? It's very simple. First, you take a deep breath. You look over your plot bunnies, all the story ideas that jump at you that you want to create, and then you sort them by date created, and you take the first one, the oldest one, the one that you spent the most time working on and you dropped because of other plot bunnies. You grab that project and you finish it. It's that easy. You take the project that you let go of because of other blood bunnies, you grab that old project and you finally finish it. You grab that project that you got the furthest into, that you wrote so much of, and you finish it. Whenever you drop your current project for that blood bunny, you are willingly choosing to start over from zero again, to start from the beginning of the story again. And that, although it may be for the best sometimes, it is setting you back. It is going to take you longer to get back up to where that other blood bunny was at. And as I told you, you will learn the most from finishing projects. Okay? Okay. And now, with the questions over, it is time now to go into the prompt/creative section of the show. This week I don't have a prompt for you. This week I want to talk about an exercise that I have found in multiple storytelling games that I haven't had a chance to cover, and I figured this is a great chance to do so. We're going to talk about something called the palette. And of course, this is a palette as in the tool that a painter uses to store paint and mix it before putting it on the canvas, not the pallet thing that you use to transport packages or, things on a truck. As a tabletop role-playing game enthusiast, and pen and paper role-playing games, I have looked deeply into storytelling games. Games where people just sit down and while dice, or in some cases, Jenga towers may be involved, at the end of it all, it's not really a game about, killing goblins and taking their stuff. It's ultimately about telling a collaborative story. The good perk of games like these is that they can often be played by yourself. You can use them to play by yourself. And that can be an incredibly rewarding experience, especially for a storyteller like us and writers. It can be a great chance to refine stories or even search for stories when you have no blood bunnies at all. Now, this is a relatively small segment, so I'm not going to have the time to go super deeply into both of these games, mostly because I want to get to the center of it so I can talk about the palette. But I do have to talk about the sources for it. The places where I found the same sentiment and idea, and I took it for myself. And I took it for, role-playing games that I've ran, as well as certain story ideas where I wanted to refine what I actually felt. And the two storytelling games that led me here, one of them I think you can't find the original version of anymore. It was called Story Leaves, as in the leaves of a tree. And the original version of that document, which thank heavens I saved on my computer as an RTF, that's how old this is. That old version, I don't think it's around anymore. There is a newer version now by the author, but the author turned that game into much more of an actual game with points and scoring, and that really changed things for me. At the end of it all, Story Leaves was a storytelling game where you made a deck of cards, of index cards, and you filled it with places, faces, themes, objects, and so on. The very first step of that game was to think what kind of story you wanted to tell, with what kind of characters, and you actually wrote on every index card the name of it, a title. It wasn't meant to be highly descriptive. You simply thought of the kind of story you wanted to tell, and then you imagined the elements that would need to go into that story. If you were to tell a fantasy story about a prince or princess, then you clearly, for that story, would need a princess. Probably the person in charge of the castle, probably the person in charge of the guards, probably the magical antagonist, their army, and you can start imagining things from there on. You need a castle, you need a magic kingdom, and you actually go through your index, set of index cards, and you create this deck. A deck with objects, like a magic sword, a magic mirror, the skull of a dragon, the witch's staff, a talking unicorn, an army of goblins, the evil witch's spell, and the ultimate goal of the game, or the process, would be to take that deck of cards with all the things you wanted to see in that story, and you would shuffle it, and you would kind of create yourself an antagonist and a protagonist, and every quotation fingers round of the game you would write a scene by drawing cards randomly from the deck. So you would have the princess and the evil witch, and you would draw a card, and it would be like the talking unicorn plus this card and this card, and you would write a scene about that, a scene with our protagonist, the princess, and the talking unicorn, and you would kind of weave the story through these elements. You would give yourself parameters and find, through your own imagination, a way to make those 3 elements or more work into a story. That was the way that Story Leaves worked, and I liked it. I liked that old version of the game, which unfortunately I don't think you can find anymore. But more so than Story Leaves, the game that I liked even way more than that is a storytelling role-playing game named Microscope. Now, Microscope is amazing. I would love to do videos / podcasts on Microscope, but without touching on any of that, Microscope is, at the end of it all, a storytelling game where you focus on a point in the timeline and you create events to fill in that timeline. It's more about the grand scheme of things than just one character. That's why Microscope is a great tool for creating backstories or creating a world. It is something that I like to do with my friends before we do the first session for our role-playing game. Creating the setting with Microscope helps us just have the big beats for the story. And I'm not going to go deeply into the systems for Microscope, thankfully, because the very first thing you do in Microscope is create something called the palette. And now we're looping back to the beginning of this. The palette is a tool in Microscope in which, at the beginning of the game, before you even start coming up with ideas and kind of doing live role-playing back and forth, you decide as a group the things that you want to see in this story and the things you don't want to see in this story. The palette, I think it's 1 card or 2 cards, and it says right on the top of it, do not want and want. And the cards go around the table in a circle, and every round you either have to add something you want or put something you don't want. And that immediately helps define the grounds for the experience. If you want to tell a supernatural story, but you don't want to have, werewolves who can turn into their animal form whenever they want to instead of just the full moon, you can just write that. No easy werewolves. If you want to do a supernatural story and you want vampires with weird blood magic, you put it in there. Blood magic under the want. And this process of focusing the lenses of the microscope to find exactly what you want was the thing that made me fall in love with Microscope, the role-playing game. The palette is a fantastic tool, and the reason why I'm bringing it to you today, just to think about this. And this relates to Story Leaves because it's a similar process of sitting down when you're thinking of a story and thinking the things you're going to need, but also thinking the things you don't want to have in this world. Like, for instance, if you're writing a supernatural story and you don't want to have werewolves who can just transform whenever they want to for whatever reason, and can only do so under, the light of the full moon, then you put that under your do not want list. And because you don't want it in there, you have to justify why it isn't in the story and think about the implications of why it isn't in the story. And just by simply excluding one thing, you're already making your story way more complex because you're thinking about it. What would it mean for vampires to have weird blood magic? How would it work? How would they learn about it? It is through this act of thinking about the story, adding and removing things from the palette, that forces us to think about it critically, analyze the things that could happen, could maybe not happen, and look for justifications. If you want to have this cool thing in your story, you have to justify it. You have to make sure it makes sense. Because if vampires can do this thing, why can't they do that other thing? And so forth. It is this act of thinking about your story critically. And at least for me, making a palette when I'm coming up with a story idea, it makes a difference, because it helps me already. Before I've started writing on page 1, I already have, I guess you could say, a much more complex idea in my head. I don't know about you, but it's, at least for me, when I'm thinking about my story critically in this way, I find nuggets of interesting things I wouldn't have thought of. Because if the vampires all have this weird blood magic, who's teaching it to them? What about some sort of like vampire blood wizard or some sort of blood master who teaches people? Wouldn't it be interesting to have a story set from that person's point of view? Where did they learn? Who taught them? What are the things that this person can't teach other vampires? Because it's blood magic that is so weird and powerful that is outlawed. I did not plan any of these things. Just to be clear right now, that all this stuff is just stuff that I'm thinking about just by putting ideas on the page, by looking at the exclusions and the additions to the palette of the story I want to create. You can even think about this as the kind of subconscious exercise that I do before I sit down here on this chair and I give you the weekly prompt. I go through addition and subtraction, and I look for the effects, the rippling effects on a story, the things that would be changed and affected, and those that would remain, and why they remain in spite of change. I think it might not be a bad idea to analyze your story idea, especially if you're about to start writing, and look at what you don't want to have. I was recently having a conversation with a writerly friend who is writing a story, or rather editing a story, about the Greek gods existing in the modern day. And because the Greek gods existed, I asked the question, well, what about the other pantheons? Do they also exist? And that forced them to ask the question and to think about it. Because when you kind of open that can of worms, you kind of have to not face the facts, but it's like, you have to face the question, do the other pantheons exist? And, my writerly friend thought about it and came to the conclusion that they wanted the other pantheons to exist. And they found this way to justify why the other pantheons didn't do this or didn't do that. But it was, again, through thinking about what you want and do not want to have in your story that you make your story more complex. You make it feel more real, more realized, because someone actually thought about these things. You. So consider analyzing that blood bunny, looking at it and asking yourself, what do I not want to have in this story? What kind of stuff in stories similar to this do I find endlessly uninteresting? You don't have to write those things. Take them out. Make it a story about the things that excite you. I don't know about you, but when I am the most excited about a story, the most I want to sit down and write it. The easier it is to sit down and write it. The least hard it is to make sacrifices, to give up free time, the harder it is to make excuses, the easier it is to justify sitting down and telling that story. Hi there. I would like to add here on the last segment of the show that Microscope is as it says in the description, a fractal role-playing game of epic histories by Ben Robbins. It's actually available on Amazon as physical and as Kindle version, I think. I actually bought it from the indie RPG store a long time ago, and I didn't know it was on Amazon. So if you're interested in checking out Microscope and how to play it, I recommend it. That game is super fun. It's not like a formal RPG, with dice. It doesn't even have dice. But it's a nice way to create a complex world with people. But anyhow, hey there. The name is Max, also known as M. Kieran, and I hope you enjoyed my weekly writing advice and inspiration podcast, Omakase. Writing is hard, but I think what matters the most at the end of it all is to learn from our mistakes and to sit down and write. I hope that between now and the next time we meet again, that you have written even if just a little. Okay? I hope you have a lovely day. I know that I will. Okay? And now, it is time for the last part of the show. It is time for me to give a big shout out to every single one of the people who make this podcast a reality. And of course, apologies to anyone whose name may or may not be about to be butchered in the following read. A. Howard, Atalak, Elisa Dudley, Amanda Stevens, Amelia, Amy Palmer, Angela, Aniexo Hoshi, Biting the Sun, Blarg. I have so much fun reading Blarg's name. That's a good name. That's a good name. Brenda, C.E. Richards, Caitlin Bumbalo, Cannibal Lily, Carriette Eccleston, Kathy Lindsay, Christiane, Christine Dennis, Kristen Lofton, Citro, Clem Pastor, Carissa Glasheen, Dwayne Jackson, Erasos, Joffrey, Heather Tasker, Irina Phoenix, John Netz, Janosch Hebatsky, Jaytona Kirkwood, Jeffrey James Williams, Joe, Juan Nunes, K.M. Anderson. I slipped into a little bit of a southern accent there. K.M. Anderson. Listen. YouTube is not paying me the big bucks for my southern accent, okay? It's fine. Kameshwar Rao Shaluri, Kaylee, Kiel, Kit Lee, Lear Killo, Lisa Effa, Loki, M.T. Lucatelli, Mark Maruska, Mary Foster Smith, Nicola, Nicole Grissom. Oh, new patron. Okay, I got this. Nicolay. I have a few patrons, like literally, Nicola, Nicole, Nicolay. It's like, one of these days, my dyslexia is gonna get real bad, and you're all gonna look really funny. But for now, thank you for the pledge, Nicolay. Noam Sahar. Novels and Tomes. Pablo, Pat Eichson, Polly Craftual, Rain Misoa, Raquel Fernandez, Roa, Shimmer Tales. That didn't sound right. Shimmer Tales. Sky D. White, Soul Muse, Sylvia Leitilla, Synexia, Thomas Baker, and Wendy Christopher. Hey guys, thank you for your support. Welcome back to the end of the show club. What did I call it last time? End of the video club? Yeah, I think it was end of the video club. How y'all doing? A point has emerged from, comments here and there. Why don't I do the things that other YouTubers / people do with podcasts? Where they just record, they record themselves shouting out people and then they just paste it. Why do I go through the trouble of reading out all of the names? Well, first and foremost, because I love my patrons. And second, because it's fun. It's fun. And it also, I don't want to say, this sounds big-headed. I like being reminded that there are so many people cheering me on who love this content and want to see more. It's a nice reminder, especially in a social media culture where people just look at the follower numbers or the subscriber numbers and they don't realize that, though each person there is a person, is a real person. And I think people forget that. People just, our silly human brains just want the bigger number, the biggest number that we can, in spite of realizing that, every person that chooses to follow you or subscribe to you is a real person and they're meaningful. Oh, dang, I got real sappy there. Listen. This is the stuff you get at... This is the exclusive content for the end of the video club. But for now, with all that sappiness out of the way, man, I got real sappy in this video. Between this and between, going on about getting married and being, just overall very sappy and very happy, because I am very happy at the moment. I hope that things get better. I hope that if you're having a bad day, that things start looking up. And if they don't, that's okay. What matters is not having one good day, but making the most out of a bad one. So get up, get out there, and get writing.